Well, hello, everyone. Happy 4th of July. Hi there. My name is Luke Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me here on this Independence Day celebration here in Estados Unidos. Of course, this is not a regular Morning Kombat. There is no regular Morning Kombat today. We did do a post-fight show, Brian and I, live from Las Vegas on Saturday night. But we did want to make sure that we got to some of the stuff that we did not get to on Saturday. So here is an episode of Morning Kombat Extra Credit, a podcast within the podcast where we talk about some of the fights we don't get to normally on Big MK. And this stuff we may or may not have gotten to on regular MK, at least with stuff with Cerrone. But there's a lot of other things that happened on the prelim card from UFC 276 that is worth getting to. First things first, thumbs up on the video. Please hit subscribe. I hope you are doing well. I am happy to be home. I am very happy to be home. It was a long week. Again, thanks to all the Morning Kombat fans who came out for Friday's show. Again, Friday's show is a bit of a show for the folks at home, but just the same, it was a long and productive week, and we're really grateful for it. So thanks to everyone who consumed every part of it. Thanks to all the folks from Molka and Showtime and CBS Sports for making it possible. But the job is not done. The job is not done. We have to get to the results from the prelim card from UFC 276. So this is going to be a no-frills episode. This, of course, is very much a no-frills podcast. This is going to be a no-frills episode of a no-frills podcast, but we're going to get to it just the same. So appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you so much. Let's talk about what happened at UFC 276 from the prelim card, which, of course, aired on ABC, the middle part of it anyway, all the way down. First things first, we start with Jalin Turner defeating Brad Riddell. How about it? 45 seconds of round number one. Dude, Jalin Turner is amazing. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Now, I do have a very high opinion of Brad Riddell. I think he is very, very good, which of course makes this win by Turner very good. He got hit with a punch early. You heard Daniel Cormier talk about the fact that he probably thought he was still in kicking range and didn't think that he was going to get cracked in the way that he did. In fact, if you notice, it looked like he was trying to counter the jab with that kind of inside leg kick that would disrupt the base and turn you. But Turner seemed to either anticipate it or just had that right hand dialed up. And of course, if you're Riddell and you're throwing from the lead side your left leg into that way, what often happens is, technically, I think my understanding is the right hand's supposed to come up and then the left hand extends out. But either way, the left hand was extended out, which left all of this. So Turner brings right behind it the right hand and cracks Riddell. They kind of get into close quarters, and as they do, Turner throws another uppercut. I wasn't sure if it landed quite on the body as intended, but another uppercut landed. And then he goes for a guillotine and ends up with a mounted version of it. Uses the legs to grapevine, stretches it out. You can see the head of and then the neck get compressed of Brad Riddell, and that was all she wrote. But the fact that he was able to find that right hand right behind it, even after getting his base disrupted, the timing of it, the understanding of his length. I mean, this is the thing about lanky opponents. There's a lot of talk about are they only good because they're tall? Well, I don't know. I don't know how do we really measure that, but that's not really the operative question. The operative question is, do they use their length to their advantage? Because that is what you are supposed to do. You are supposed to use your length to your advantage, right? Whatever your features are that may be, you want to see if you can maximize them. And I have to tell you, I lived through a long era of MMA where a lot of tall fighters or lanky fighters, whatever the case may be, didn't use their reach properly, didn't use their height to their advantage, didn't use a lot of things that you thought would have been advantageous to them. They didn't use it. So I'll tell you what, is Jalin Turner good without his reach? Well, he wouldn't be Jalin Turner, number one, so it's kind of a silly question. But the point is, does he use his natural attributes in a way that advances his interests? And does he do so cleverly, for example? Does he do so with intelligence? Yes, of course he does. His striking looks to me phenomenal. His accuracy, his punching power, by the way, looks pretty good too. But the fact that he can get people when their defense has transferred, right, and he can find those openings, that's really the big key insight. That's the thing you should hold on to. And, of course, there's an argument to be made that had Riddell not been cracked so early, he would have found a way to settle into the fight. But, I don't know that for a fact. That's hard to say. Again, I do have a high opinion of Brad Riddell, so I think, do I think that was the very best version of him? Probably not. But either way, the big story here is not, the kind of Brad Riddell that showed up that night necessarily. To me, it's more that Turner is turning into something very special. Now, I will say one of the things about being a lanky opponent that can hurt you is in the grappling department. And I do think as he advances up the food chain, we're going to need to see that part of his game more thoroughly tested. Obviously, this was not the thorough test of that part of his game in any kind of real way. But when you're lanky and your arms can get separated from your body and your limbs can get extended, that can actually be quite bad for you. You have to be a specific kind of lanky grappler, I think, to get the most out of yourself. And guys who aren't very protective of that or very aware of that, if you're going to be lanky, like a Charles Oliveira has a bit of a lanky, I mean, he's filled out obviously, but he's got something of a lanky vibe. But, he's constantly attacking. I think if you're going to be one of those kinds of lanky guys, you can't be super defensive with your grappling. And, of course, in this case, he certainly was not. But what I mean is, let's say someone takes you down and gets you on your back. You can get past if you have really long limbs and you're not super, super good about protecting that inside space. So, plenty of questions still to be asked about where exactly is the end line of the line for Jalin Turner. How far can he go? I don't know the answer to those questions. Again, still too early. But in terms of his striking, he's already good enough for I think, top 10 of that division. I mean that. I have such a high opinion of him. I think he is so good. And you can say whatever you want about John Jones's limbs and Jalin Turner's limbs and any other person who is really tall and rangy. Don't take it away from them. Don't say, oh, they're only good but for this. No, they're good because of this. And it's not just by having long arms. The list of guys that I have seen come and go in mixed martial arts who were tall and had range on opponents and didn't know how to use it intelligently is endless. I'm talking year after year after year of that. Finally, we're getting a generation of fighters, and Jalin Turner is one of the better ones of this younger generation, who have length, who have height, but use it intelligently. That's what you want. That's what you're looking for. Let's see how that looks on the ground when against more capable opponents who can test him in that particular department. But he looks to be something super special. Good for him. Jim Miller defeats Donald Cerrone via guillotine choke. So he had 2 guillotine chokes in a row at 132 of the second round. I didn't think Cerrone looked bad at all in this one. His front kick was pretty good. There was a couple times when Miller would blitz, maybe get a couple small shots in, but Cerrone would often get the better of them, particularly as Miller retreated. But what ended up happening was he ate a head kick that didn't quite land fully, but Cerrone lost his balance. And then in the ensuing scramble, you see Miller jump guillotine. Now, what's interesting about the jumping of the guillotine is what you're kind of looking for. And again, they can be finished in all different ways. But as a general rule, what you're looking for is, particularly with an arm-in guillotine, what you're looking for is to see the choking arm on the same side of the mat, right? They don't want to have that elbow high flared in the air. And again, you can have a high elbow flare off a high elbow guillotine. What I'm talking about is the choking arm being buried underneath and then on the same side as the mat. That's an ideal scenario. What you notice is Cerrone was trying to do a couple things. One, lift the choking arm into the air, because then you can pull down on it. There's a lot of things. It's hard to get that same crank when it's lifted that way. Again, you want to have everything turning on that mat side in an ideal scenario. Go back to Shavkat Rakhmonov. He's very good about making sure that happens. And you can be flat too, by the way. I just mean you don't, in an ideal scenario, you don't want to have your choking arm high in the air in an ideal scenario, okay? So you saw Cerrone try and move in that direction, and the other part is he was trying to tripod out, right? Because if your neck and your head are being tucked under, to the extent your hips can come up and relieve that pressure, you can hold on or hand fight or just give yourself just enough oxygen, just enough space to do that. And you could see he was trying to get the guard of Miller behind his rear end to his thighs or whatever, his hamstrings, so then Cerrone could pop out, but he couldn't quite get it done. And then eventually, and again, I want to be clear about this, you can do it flat on your back too with an arm in. I mean, there's a lot of different ways folks might finish those. So, but again, you just don't want it highly flared. That's what you don't want. So eventually he gets right to a bat at the center of his back, and then he's able to crank it and get it to go. And then that was all she wrote. In fact, he had the far hand of Cerrone trapped, where Cerrone could only kind of tap like this in the end. You know, what do you want to say about the career of Donald Cerrone? He is going to be on the short list of the very best fighters to never win a UFC title. I suspect he will go into the UFC Hall of Fame. There's probably a different discussion to be had about whether or not he would go into an MMA Hall of Fame. And I know that folks don't want to hear stuff like that because at a time like this, you only want to think about the good parts. There is a broader conversation to be had about any fighter who's retiring and where they actually fit into those places. But someone was asking me on Instagram, what's one of my favorite memories from Donald Cerrone's career? He had a lot of them, dude. And by the way, even some of those losses, he had a blood and guts affair or, showed up. And I'd say a couple things. For me, one of my favorite memories was when Eddie Alvarez came over, and it's nothing against Eddie Alvarez. You can pick out a million amazing parts of his career, which, by the way, is still ongoing. But when he made his UFC debut, they tasked him with Cerrone, and I thought he was going to give Cerrone the business. And eventually, of course, Alvarez turned into be something quite special in the UFC. But that was a big moment for Donald Cerrone. He was kind of like the test to see what was going to happen here. And, dude, he had an absolutely sensational performance. He beat up Eddie Alvarez's legs to the point where he could barely use them. He won that cleanly. And the other thing I would say about Cerrone, you could pick any number of other wins, but even in his losses or whatever, like this dude would travel to any part of the globe, the world to fight an opponent. He would take on risk that wasn't always necessarily in his interest. He just did whatever he needed to do. There's a lot of guys who go by the name Cowboy who don't really, and of course everyone's nickname and there's always part truth to it, and it's just part, flair for the dramatics. But his always felt like have gun, will travel, right? That he just seemed like that kind of a guy, and he wasn't just some guy who would show up and be a journeyman for you. He almost had like a journeyman sensibility in terms of where he would go, but then he had very high level abilities. He was a weird contrast in that way. Most of the guys who fight in the way that Cerrone fought in terms of accepting challenge, accepting risk, traveling overseas, whatever it needed to be, they never ended up being very good. But Cerrone actually was very good. And that, being both of those things at the same time, that is extremely difficult. However, at the end of the run here, I think it's a very good time for him. I probably could have retired a little bit earlier to save himself some health. He hasn't had a full-on win since 2019. We're now in 2022. It was probably time. But, dude, let me just rattle off some of these wins. And I know I'm just reading off the resume here, but this is a remarkable run that he had. Danny Castillo, Rob McCullough, James Krause, Ed. Y'all don't even know who Ed 9mm Ratcliffe is. That's a great win that Cerrone had over him. Jamie Varner, Chris Horodecki, Paul Kelly, Wagner Hocha, Charles Oliveira, Dennis Seaver, Jeremy Stevens, Melvin Gillard, KJ Nunes, Evan Dunham, Adriano Martins, Edson Barboza. He had previously beaten Jim Miller, Eddie Alvarez, Miles Jury, Benson Henderson, John McDessie. That's probably his best run. Cowboy Oliveira, Patrick O'Tay, Rick Story, Matt Brown, Yancy Medeiros, Mike Perry, Alexander Hernandez, and Ally Quinta. Boy, I got to tell you, that is one hell of a run, man. That is an extraordinary push all the way through. And it also kind of shows, man, the number of WEC vets in the UFC is dwindling. There's not that many left. And all of MMA, there's not that many left. Guys who fought and won in WEC, how many of them are still out there competing? There are obviously some, but it's that every month and year that passes, it seems like that number's getting smaller and smaller. So a guy who represented who was invaluable for the UFC in an important era for their growth, a guy who was invaluable for even smaller organizations like WEC. He's part of the WEC, I think, if not Mount Rushmore, a very, 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 very important part of their history as well. A guy who represented everything that the fan base wants from a fighter, and a guy who did not necessarily reach the highest levels of the game, right? And got pretty close. I mean, the RDA fight, he got kind of beaten pretty soundly, but who had a ton of good wins across multiple weight classes, kind of across multiple generations in some ways. And given his record of activity, given how many times he was fighting, I would say disadvantageously, was it a good style matchup? Was he traveling to another guy's hometown, whatever that may be, just kept doing it and kept doing it and kept doing it. And I think earned the respect of the fans, earned the respect of his peers, earned the respect of the media, certainly, earned the respect of the promoters. I mean, there's not a lot of people who are going to have a ton of bad things to say about the kind of fighter Cerrone was, even during his losses, even during the last stage of his career. Very much one of a kind. I don't think you're going to see guys like this very often in the future as fighters get more and more selective about what kind of fights they take. Again, there will be some differences there. But he came from a generation where, guys just kind of took on risk more readily and not always to their advantage. And no one has quite made it work doing what he did at the level which he got. You can argue that, yes, he did not make it to the very highest level. You can say those things. Those are real. You have to acknowledge them. But how many people would, taking as many fights as he did, how many would, taking as much risk as he did, how many would go into as many other fighters' hometowns as he did? Very, very difficult way to fight that way. And so his record of success through that is pretty special. Very, very special, very unique fighter. I wish him nothing but the best in retirement, provided he actually stays in retirement. He might come out. Who knows? One can't say for certain. For Jim Miller, he has, I think, 40 fights in the octagon now, which is almost hard to imagine. He's on a 3-fight win streak, and he has found a way to have some longevity later in life. Now, he wasn't part of the reason why Cerrone might be having something of an earlier exit is because, again, he took some really tough fights. Miller of late has been kind of fighting very tough guys, very good guys, but not the sort of bigger names, guys who have really advanced the ladder in the same kind of way that Cerrone was. And so there are some meaningful differences there, but that has helped his longevity. Here he is, 3-fight win streak. How old is Jim Miller? Jim Miller currently sits at 38 years old. He'll be 39 next month. Another very, very, very special guy. And I saw Aaron Bronsteter tweeted after speaking to Dana White that if Miller is around for UFC 300, he fought at UFC 100 and UFC 200. They're going to put him on the card at 300. I hope they find a way if he sticks around that long. That'd be something kind of interesting, wouldn't it? Ian Gary defeating Gabe Greene via unanimous decision. I thought this was a strong performance from Gary. Did he have a sensational knockout? No. Did he, dominate him on the ground and threaten with the chokes a bunch of times? No. But you know what he did do? He managed to range really well. Now, they got kind of close in some other moments. Gabe Greene can thump, and when he could get Gary backed up against the fence, he had a little bit more success in a few departments. But in general, I'm speaking in broad strokes here, I like this performance of Ian Gary. I thought he had good shot selection in terms of what punches and strikes he was picking. He managed the distance well. He didn't get tired for the most part. He moved around the octagon well. He didn't ever get to a point where he could really have Gabe Greene suffering for long stretches. He didn't get close to a finish, I think is a fair way to put that, although he did, obviously hurt him several times. But, I'm nitpicking a little bit, obviously. This is not, this is hardly the end of the world. I think he's still very much in development. The thing I would only say about Ian Gary at this point is I love this performance from him. Again, I thought it was, to be that disciplined all the way through, to be that sticking to your game plan as it's working and applying it consistently in the way that he was. That's really the story here. But I would also say a lot of folks want Ian Gary to be further along in his development than he is. This is not me saying he won't get there. He seems to be well on his way. Rather, he is still clearly in development. He is still clearly a fighter who's got significant potential, but it's not actualized just yet. So my only thing would be, if you are Irish, I know the Irish, they get up big for their own people, which nothing wrong with that. They want him to be a big star already. Pump the brakes. How old is Ian Gary? I don't think he's that old, is he? He's 24. He's 24. Pump the brakes. Let him develop. This was a great fight for him to get, another step in that journey. But there's, I would say, still a fairly long way to go before I think he's reached his full potential. And so if you rush it because you want him to be so ready, you could potentially ruin his development. He showed real things here that are valuable and scalable as he moves up the food chain. Distance management, good punch selection, good lateral movement, good footwork, all those things. Those, if you can keep developing those will last and be valuable against anyone at any point. But it doesn't mean that because he has them now, he should be fighting somebody, out just outside the top 15 or even inside of it. Pump the brakes. Let the kid be. Let him get better. Let him work on things. And then in 2, 3, 4 years' time, provided he has still maintained all of the things that have gotten to this point, I think you'll see something pretty special, right? I think you'll see something pretty special. But this idea that is he ready for the top 15 yet? Maybe he could fight someone in there and win. There's no need to rush it. There's no need to rush it. He's doing great. Let him keep building on the journey that he's on. And then when he's really doing, like, for example, what Jalin Turner did to Brad Riddell, when you're doing stuff like that, then you got some questions to ask about how much further, where is he in his development, and how ready is he for the top 15? Obviously, that Gary's at welterweight, different division, but even if he was getting finishes, I would still say kind of slow roll him. But it's clear that Gary is putting the pieces of his game together, and he's over there at, well, I guess they used to be called Sanford. I guess they're called Kill Cliff FC now. They got a great team there. They know what they're doing. Everyone, tranquilo. Let the flower grow, yeah? All right. Dricus du Plessis at middleweight defeating Brad Tavares, 29-28 across the board. I thought Tavares won the first, looked great in the first. Boy, du Plessis is an interesting fighter, right? He does a lot of stuff that isn't supposed to work. Now, he looks like he is super physically strong. He looks like he is a dynamic athlete, and that will aid him. In the first round, he was just blitzing and charging, and Brad Tavares was stepping off and countering him several times. So I thought Tavares looked good early. The problem for Tavares, it seemed to me, in this contest is not that he wasn't technically up to the fight, up to the challenge. I think he is. The issue for me seemed to be that he took the first round game plan that was working into the second, which, okay, fine. But by the second, things had begun to change. Du Plessis was still charging in, chin high in the air, rushing forward on those blitzes. But he was being a little bit more careful about his entries, a little bit more careful about some of the combinations he was throwing, getting Tavares to transfer defense so that he could land to the body in certain cases. So he was having a little bit more success with it. By the third round, it was pretty clear that strategy of laying back, unless Tavares could check hook and step off at an angle, just absorbing pressure, stepping back with your high hands like that, it wasn't getting the job done. He needed to then press into du Plessis, and the times he did that, I thought he had some success. So to me, it was a question of the game plan that worked in round one was not the game plan, or the way in which he fought round one wasn't going to work in round three. He had to switch gears, and he didn't switch gears. Meanwhile, du Plessis still kind of fought in a very similar way, but dialed it back somewhat more intelligently by the end of the third. But I have to say, du Plessis, he is such a physical force. He is such a dynamic fighter. He's obviously a tremendously hard hitter. I do think some of those blitzes and whatnot, especially on some of those straight lines for long distances, man, some of the guys in this division they're gonna feast on that if some of that doesn't get changed. I think, just my opinion. I'm not du Plessis' coach. Du Plessis coaches are not hitting me up asking me for my opinion. It's just one guy's opinion. That's all it is. You should take it for that. No more, no less. But I don't see a lot of the top tier guys doing a lot of that. And for all of the physicality and verve that he brings, and he does, dude, he brings some electricity to the fight, no doubt about it. Those kinds of things, the more elite guys in this division, they are going to feast on that unless some other parts of it get changed up a little bit, like delayed blitzes or switch stance blitzes and whatever. Shifting, drop shifting, all those kinds of things. I would like to see a little bit more of that put together to really see how far du Plessis can go. He got it done against Brad Tavares, and that is no small feat. Tavares is a gifted veteran who, again, won the first round. So du Plessis, to me, had to come back in the second and third, and he did, obviously. But I don't know how far he can take that kind of style of fighting in this division. That's a risky way to fight. All right, so now we go to the early prelim card. Andre Muniz taking on Uriah Hall. Here's a funny story. So I got dropped off yesterday at the airport in Las Vegas. Took my Uber, just dropped me off on the side. And the way Uber drops you off, I guess there's another lane for people just who are not Ubers, just dropping off family members. So there's two lanes. So he drops me off, and there's a crosswalk in the middle, and then there's another lane. And so I was crossing, and I was waiting because actually cars were going in front. And I look over, and I thought I saw Uriah Hall in his car, but I'm tired as balls. I haven't slept, and either way, I'm not trying to bother anybody. I'm just trying to go get to my flight. And but cars kept passing, and then they stop, and I have a direct line with him, and he goes, "Hey, do I know you?" And I was like, "You probably do." He's like, "You're that media reporter guy." And I was like, something like that. And then I told him, it was a tough fight, and he had good back escapes, and I didn't know what to say. I'm just passing in the crosswalk. He seemed to acknowledge it. He had a nice car, by the way. He had a really nice car. In any case, Uriah Hall had never been subbed heading into this contest, and I saw some folks being like, "Oh, Muniz, who has been subbing people who don't get subbed, will sub Uriah Hall," but it doesn't always work that way, right? Now, Muniz won this fight handily, obviously. His ability to find mount, his ability to get the back was extraordinary. We already knew that. He had some good ground and pound from mount. I mean, he was putting Uriah Hall in desperate positions pretty regularly in this fight. His single leg was pretty good. The takedowns got less effective as time wore on, and you did see this from Uriah Hall. He had a few interesting back escapes as well, a la Anthony Pettis, where you can sink your hips lower and then turn, and then you can drive back into him, which is what he did. It was a pretty great job by him. So Uriah Hall, still 30 fights in, hasn't been subbed. That's not an accident. He has very, very good sub defense. He is good, and he's calm from the back. The problem was Muniz was just kind of all over him. In the stand-up, too, Hall just never got a chance to get going. He just seemed like he was constantly on the defense, and he was defending. But it wasn't enough to ever have meaningful offense in this contest. In fact, let me look up the numbers on this. I would love to see what they were for this from old Fight Metric. For Andre Muniz, who moves, by the way, to 23-4, very good fighter. Yeah, not a ton of offense in this one. Uriah Hall had no strikes in the first round, 0 of 8, and no strikes in the third, 0 of 3. He did have 6 significant strikes land in the second round. So he only had 6 significant strikes land. Just 17 for Muniz, but Muniz in round 1, 2 minutes and 41 seconds of control time, and that's advancing position. That's not just holding it. He had 3 minutes and 28 seconds in round 2, and then 4 minutes of control time, plus 2 takedowns in round 1, 1 takedown in round 2, 1 takedown in round 3. And he doesn't get credited with any sub attempts. Uriah Hall gets 1 reversal in round 2, 1 reversal in round 3. Those are pretty great jobs by him, although the reversal, I believe, in round 2 didn't come till quite close to the end. But, Muniz he might contend for a title. He's big, he's physical, he can advance position, he can hold position. He needs to do a little bit more about kind of threatening fight-ending scenarios, at least with opponents who are as good at resisting and have defensive sensibilities in the way that Uriah Hall does. But this was a very, very strong performance. He is a very special talent, and it's not easy to make Uriah Hall land only 6 significant strikes in a fight, and he did it. That's impressive. That's extremely impressive. Let's see. Macy Barber defeating Jessica Eye, who then retired as well, 29-28 on 2 of the judges' scorecards, 30-27. Eye did a pretty good job in the sense of tying up Barber, getting underneath her strikes, and then pressing her in the clinch into the fence. She couldn't do a whole lot with it after that, though. That was the big issue. Jessica Eye, strong, veteran, but just didn't seem to have that next level for okay, let's put some offense together from these advantageous positions, or at least these positions that I want to put you in. Didn't see a whole lot in that respect. So Macy Barber able to frame, able to keep off of it a little bit later. Let's look at the control time for this, because that would actually tell us a fair bit. So I had 8 minutes and 9 seconds of control time, 2:59, basically 3 minutes in round 1, almost 4 minutes in round 2. Round 2, I thought she won, but then just 1 minute and 18 seconds. I did get 1 takedown in the second, and that was the only one she got. But Macy Barber had double the number of strikes in round 3, about the same in round 2, and then 1.5x in round 1. That was enough of the difference. She was able to get some slashing elbows. She was able to create some separation. There was a lot of control. This is a scenario where the modern rules, I think, are quite valuable, where what was really meaningful about the control that I had, other than it was stifling. Okay, it was stifling, but you got to do something else behind the stifling, and you didn't really see that here. Barber got a little dicey then after the second, but then had the strongest. She, by the way, has stronger third rounds than first rounds. I wouldn't say it's fair to call her a slow starter, because she won the first round as well. But even in the Maverick fight, you saw that Barber had a strong conclusion to that 3-round affair. Something to pay attention to for the future of her career. So this was a nice win by Barber. She is on quite the roll at this point after suffering those 2 losses back-to-back to Modafferi and Grasso. She's now beaten Maverick, Montana De La Rosa, and Jessica Eye. I think it's time for a bit of a step up since those 2 losses, but that's a tremendous, tremendous win. God, she was born the month before I graduated high school. I'm telling you, bro, old age sucks. It'll kick your ass. So that's a nice win by her. And then last but not least, I think it's Julia, however you pronounce it, Stoliorenko defeating Jessica Rose Clark via armbar. Jessica Rose Clark is not some scrub on the ground. But here's the thing. If you notice where your arms are, you have this constant tension in jiu-jitsu. If someone is passing, you kind of want to have one hand sometimes on the neck is where you can put the other hand in there. You want to have a frame inside their hip crease, right? So you can kind of frame, and then you can put your hips away and then get to a more advantageous position. But, it's not so simple all the time to be able to exact that. And what ends up happening, what you always want to look for is pay attention to where their elbows are. Right, I talk about this all the time. You'll see guys come out in grappling and they'll have like T-Rex arm where their elbows are kind of glued to their ribs, and they're using that because to the extent your arm gets separated, this is where all that space is that they want to occupy. They want to occupy, let me put my hand out. They want to occupy everything in this space. And so if your elbow is closed, it's hard to do that. If your elbow's open, even just a little bit, they can sneak under it. And what you'll notice is she passes to her own left, Stoliorenko, which is what most people do. And then she scoops the far side elbow of Jessica Rose Clark. If the elbow is off the mat or away from the ribs, that's all they need. And then she pulls it to herself. So what you're going to see is the elbow literally come across almost her center line. And then she uses that to sit in to the far side armbar. Her sit in was excellent. And I got to tell you, folks, if you're not used to doing something like that, sitting in to the far side arm takes a lot of practice. You have to be very nimble because if you just sit to the same side arm, it's much easier to get your hips glued to where they need to go. Sitting to the far side, it's a much bigger motion, which means there's much more opportunity for your hips to be farther away from where they need to be. It's the space can open up a lot easier. Someone could yank their arm back in. There's a lot that has to happen. So you have to be quick with it, and you have to be positionally locked in tight at the same time. That's hard to do. And she did it. And then she kept torquing, and then they even passed the tap. Jessica Rose Clark didn't seem to be too happy with that, which I understand. But if you're the person fighting, you're not supposed to go even with a tap until the referee intervenes. So, it kind of happens. But that's what you're looking for is Rose Clark. You can see a moment where I think she's wrapping the head of Stoliorenko. And when she wraps the head like this, that's when the arm gets pulled, and then she turns and sits. Not easy to do. Not easy to do. Again, anyone who's really good at jiu-jitsu can do that in pure jiu-jitsu terms. But in an MMA fight where all kinds of things can go wrong, the ability to sit for a far side arm like that, yeah, they weren't sweaty, which is good, but still not so simple. It's a nice win by her. What a card, man. You had two futures on there, Gary and Barber, two people named the future who won. And then with Cowboy and Jessica Eye, you had two people retiring on the same card. Kind of tells you everything about where MMA is these days. There's a lot of people, there's big generational pushes coming through, and you're seeing some of the results of that here. We'll talk more about everything that happened last week in Las Vegas on Wednesday's MK. We'll talk a little bit of PFL as well, and then we'll get ready for the weekend's fights that are coming up. I appreciate you watching. Be safe today on July 4th. Thumbs up on the video, hit subscribe, and until next time, enjoy the fights.